Live is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate for the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate or encourage any illegal activity and advise all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws by visiting norml.org, Norml.org. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers of Norml Show Live are their own and do not necessarily reflect the philosophy and policies of Norml. Listener discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws presents Norml Show Live, Marijuana Nation. Now, here's your host, Norml's outreach coordinator, Radical Russ Belville.
How does you word the meaning of the word we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
And establish this Constitution of the United States of America. That's right. William Shatner is 81 years old today, so happy birthday goes out to one of the people I grew up watching on the television. It meant a lot to me. Happy birthday, Bill Shatner. Welcome, folks. It is Thursday, March 22nd, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us here on Norml Show Live, the voice of the Marijuana Nation. We got a special extended show for you today with a half-hour interview with Norml founder Keith Stroup on this, the 40th anniversary of the Shafer Commission report on marijuana. If you remember your history, President Nixon was looking to have a statement that would just tear the ass out of him, and he formed this commission with members of Congress and other appointed people, including Governor Raymond Shafer. And Governor Shafer came back with a report that said that marijuana ought to be decriminalized. It's the only time the U.S. government's ever studied this, and the only recommendation that's ever officially been made said that we should decriminalize marijuana. So Keith Stroup will talk to us, tell us about what it was like back then when that report first came out, as Norml was a brand new organization at the time, and what lasting effect it's had on marijuana law reform. Also on today's show, cops say legalize drugs, so we're going to be visiting with David Long. He's retired from the Bureau of the Department of Labor, United States Department of Labor, the bureau that investigates labor racketeering, union fraud and corruption. And we'll be talking about that and how unions are going to be now impacting medical marijuana dispensaries in the state of California. Before we get to all that, though, let's welcome our senior news editor from the virtual studio in Grass Storia. It's Cannabis Carrie. How you doing, Carrie? All right. Well, what do we have in the news stories today? All right, we'll check that out. Plus, I've got a report on the spike in emergency room admissions regarding not marijuana, folks, but energy drinks. I got an expose on that we'll go to at the end of the news. Plus, Wiz Kaliko's hanging out here at the end of the table. How you doing, Wiz?
Aloha. Doing well, man. Glad to be here.
Glad you got your paper all done.
Finals are over.
Finals are over. Also, we got Groovin' Thursday music from the Dubber coming up next on Norml Show Live.
You're listening to Norml Show Live, the voice of the Marijuana Nation.
weedmaps.com. I'm Radical Russ from Norml. In my job as outreach coordinator, I travel every month, and when I'm on the road, I need a fast, accurate way to find the medical marijuana dispensaries in the area. So I turn to weedmaps.com. Weedmaps.com has the best dispensary locator online or on your mobile device. Search by zip code or let Weedmaps find you, and in seconds you'll have the addresses, phone numbers, and customer service reviews for the medical marijuana dispensaries in the local area. Weedmaps.com also has a section devoted to helping you find a doctor who understands and recommends medical marijuana under your state's law. You can even check prices on the Medical Marijuana Stock Exchange. Coming soon, you'll even be able to find the listings of Norml attorneys and chapters, local head shops and grow shops, and the best weed-friendly businesses. Weedmaps.com has the information you need to be an informed cannabis consumer. Visit weedmaps.com today, a proud sponsor of the Norml Network.
Hey, what up? It's the Dirtball from the Cottonmouth Kings. You are now listening to the Norml Show live.
Hi, I'm Radical Russ. One of the best things about marijuana is the wonderful aroma. But when you travel a lot like I do, that aroma becomes a suspicious smell. That's why I endorse stealth-products.com, the leaders in smell-proof containers. From smell-proof vacuum bags to smell-proof backpacks and duffel bags, all the way to smell-proof digital safes, stealth-products.com has you covered. Stealth-products.com brings you safe, secure, odorless layers of protection with activated carbon fiber. Backpacks and duffel bags are simple black so as not to attract attention with a logo or flashy design. Now, nothing is perfectly odor controlled from the detection of drug dogs, but with proper vigilance, containers from stealth-products.com will help you avoid nosy humans.
You're now listening to Elliot Beats.
Stealth-products.com. Stealth-products.com.
Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, consumer cannabis. It's time for this week's Norml News with Cannabis Carrie.
Yesterday, we told you about the Quinnipiac poll that said that 68% of the voters in the state of Connecticut would support legal medical marijuana. It seems that some of Connecticut's lawmakers are finally ready to support it as well. A medical marijuana bill in Connecticut has cleared a very important first legislative hurdle. Yesterday, a large General Assembly Judiciary Committee voted to pass the bill after an hour-long debate on the measure. The General Assembly's Judiciary Committee voted 35-8 to pass the medical marijuana law for Connecticut. Similar bills have been introduced in Connecticut in recent legislative sessions and did not receive anywhere near the support, including a medical marijuana bill that never made it to the General Assembly last year for a vote. Connecticut lawmakers say that this is the best bill that they've had presented before them in a committee, and that it addresses many of the concerns of lawmakers from past attempts to pass a medical marijuana law. The bill would set up a thoroughly regulated system for licensing medical marijuana producers and dispensaries. It would allow doctors to recommend medical marijuana for qualified patients with debilitating conditions, but the recommendations would only be good for 12 months. Then the patient would have to qualify again. And the state would not allow a patient to grow the marijuana for themselves. They would have to get it from a state-licensed dispensary. During the one-hour debate before the vote, lawmakers' main concerns were the potential federal intervention of any program they pass. And even though it has yet to happen in any medical marijuana states, the concern was raised over a state employee or a doctor being arrested for drug trafficking for doing their job of issuing a license for the program. But in the end, it was compassion that moved most of the lawmakers that made a shift to a yes vote yesterday. They listened to public testimony as well from individuals facing horrific medical circumstances who found great relief from marijuana, with the only side effect of it being society labeling them as a criminal. Now that HB 5389 has made it out of a general committee, it has been filed with the Legislative Commissioner's Office. They have up to 10 days to determine if the bill is constitutional or inconsistent with the state constitution, and if they find it isn't, they will send it back to the committee or if they find that it isn't constitutional, they will send it back to the committee with an explanation, and the committee can change that bill. They will also add an estimate of the bill's cost and a plain English version of the bill before they send it to scheduling for a full vote.
Well, there we go. Another East Coast state looking at medical marijuana with no homegrown provisions, with state-run required, mandatory dispensary purchases at, what the dispensary prices will be. This is that box canyon we've been telling you about with medical marijuana. We've set up this image, or we've set up this concept in people's mind that medical marijuana is this super powerful drug that helps people in the most serious terminal stages and the most debilitating pain. Which is absolutely true. Don't get me wrong. It's absolutely true. But what that's done in people's, people that don't follow this really deeply is that they feel that it's got to be controlled really tightly, like we control OxyContin or Vicodin or some of those other very toxic, addictive pharmaceuticals. So we got ourselves in a position now where we're saying, yes, here's this wonderful, powerful drug, but let us grow it at home. Well, you can trust us with it. There's no problem with it. And having that alongside what everyone knows is a, largely a recreational market, outside of medical marijuana. Most of the people that use pot are using it recreationally. They fear that there'll be diversion. People be growing their own, smoking some for themselves, selling some on the side, and there'll be more proliferation of marijuana. So they want to keep it tightly controlled and under the government's thumb. And it's only a few years away while they keep it tightly controlled like this, where the FDA begins their clinical trials on Sativex and other cannabinoid pharmaceuticals that they will eventually be able to present to the patients in these East Coast medical states and say, hey, you remember these dispensaries? We're not going to offer you herbal cannabis anymore because now there's these fantastic sprays and inhalers and all of these other products that give you the exact same medical benefit in a reliable, controlled, measured dose. That's the direction this is going, and why the inclusion of more and more medical marijuana states without the ability of patients to grow their own medicine has me so concerned. It also has me concerned when we're talking about legalization states that are doing that as well. We have really got to start putting some focus on the fact that marijuana is safe, it's non-toxic, it's non-addictive, and that growing it yourself is really not that big of a deal in an era where it's legalized. It's only the prohibition of marijuana that makes the growing of it dangerous and subjects people to the risks and dangers of rippers and people trying to steal their crops. Nobody tries to break into your home to steal your Roma tomatoes that you're growing under a light. Nobody breaks into your garden trying to steal the zucchini that you planted out there. That's where marijuana could be. Marijuana could be at a place where it's so ubiquitous that nobody really cares that much about it anymore. The more we prohibit this and the more we set up these artificial distinctions, the longer we have before we reach true freedom.
And the city of Colorado Springs is very, very behind in processing their medical marijuana business license applications. And by very behind, out of 122 medical marijuana business license applications that were submitted to the city by last September 30th deadline that the city set, only 2 of them have made their way through the process and received a local approval and a license from the state. Now, some of those that had applied have now been forced to close their doors. Those 122 business licenses that are being reviewed were from existing businesses that were trying to comply with the new rules of the state and the city where they are located that went into effect last summer. They had to pre-register for a license by that September deadline. Now, in an email to the Colorado Gazette from the commander of the Metro Vice Narcotics and Intelligence Division said that there are a variety of reasons that this process is taking so long in Colorado Springs. Some of the reasons the city is so backlogged, according to Commander Thor Ellis, is that often applications are incomplete and are returned for corrections. The state is backed up with their own process and is delayed in forwarding and returning paperwork that is needed to proceed at the local level before the applications can then be forwarded to the state for the state's license. Also, the police department is responsible for conducting local and national background checks as well as financial background checks on the applicants and for investigating, quote, any ancillary criminal violations that are discovered and conducting audits on the applicant's locations. Now, in Colorado Springs, there are 16 businesses that have received a total of about 40 licenses from the city and are now waiting for the state to process that license application. A license enforcement officer that works in the city clerk's office in Colorado Springs says that they have 84 active applications in various stages of review at City Hall currently, and admitted that they thought it would only take between 3 and 9 months to get through all those original 122 applications. Now, those numbers leave about 20 applications that have either been withdrawn or flat out denied. Those that have been denied were mostly unable to move, and they weren't in a good location. At least two of the incidents, dispensaries were forced out by their landlords where they would not renew their lease, and unless you have a license in your hand, you are not allowed to move your location. Another dispensary in Colorado received a letter that they were too close to a private school. They had to close because they were unable to move locations either. So total number of marijuana businesses in Colorado Springs currently is roughly about 130. with only 2 of them that say they made it through the gauntlet and have received those licenses from the state.
Look, can't we skip all this and just make pot legal? Everyone is just abusing this medicinal system anyway. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the reason why they're having so much trouble getting through this backlog is because of all the hurdles they're trying to clear that are set up in these regulations that make it more onerous to try to operate these businesses than it is to, operate any other sort of business. It's just ridiculous. They don't have these kind of backlogs on other legitimate type businesses that are trying to get out. But here we have to do these background checks. Let's make sure the people that are growing pot didn't get busted growing pot before. We wouldn't want any experts doing this stuff. It's just ridiculous, and once again shows all the second-class citizenship we have to live under because marijuana is still illegal for healthy people.
A story out of New Zealand from Auckland, where police raided a warehouse this weekend where they got a tip that cannabis activists were selling marijuana out of a vending machine. A few people told the Auckland police that you could buy a gram bag of cannabis for $20 from a machine at a cannabis clubhouse. Police raided that clubhouse that night and seized the cannabis vending machine along with $27,000 in cash, some drug paraphernalia, and then they arrested 4 people at the scene. Police said they let another 16 people that were present at the raid leave the premises. The backpack where the cash was found had an additional pound of marijuana that was bagged up and ready to sell. The 3 men and 1 woman arrested were charged with multiple drug offenses, including possession and possession for supply. The warehouse is infamous in Auckland, and it is called the Dactory. It opened back in 2008 and had a membership of several thousand before Dr. Green, the cannabis activist who opened the warehouse, was jailed with an 8-month sentence beginning last June for selling marijuana and for allowing the warehouse to be used as a place where drug consumption takes place. Now, the 61-year-old is still in jail following that 8-month sentence he received in June of last year because in September, the Solicitor General appealed his sentence, saying it was too short, and the Court of Appeals tripled it to 23 months in prison. A compassionate judge offered a home detention instead for the 61-year-old Dr. Green, but Green rejected that offer, saying his conviction was politics. The club, the Dactory, was shut down to the public at that time, but was being used as the headquarters for New Zealand Norml. New Zealand Norml President Julian Crawford confirmed this week that, yes, the club had been back open for businesses from Wednesday through Sundays this year, and that the detectives got to the vending machine on a very busy night that after they had a few hundred sales. He said the machine has been very popular and said they were trying to inspire activists for them to see how things could be if cannabis was legalized. He said that the police had actually visited the club last week and announced that they were setting up checkpoints outside the club to interview people leaving the club. He said that they respected the officers' job that they had to do and that most members were very relaxed about the impending sting. He said an officer said they were only acting on the directives of higher-ups. The police say that they will continue to monitor the activities at the Dactory.
Yeah, and since this story involves one of our international affiliates, New Zealand Norml, there's not a whole lot of commentary I can offer at this time while the investigation is pending. But I can tell you about this next story. We got the note from Melinda Hogg, the U.S. attorney in California. They're going after all of these dispensaries. In particular, we reported on Berkeley Patients Group that they were going after. And the San Francisco Weekly blog finally got her for a sit-down interview to find out why it was they were going after these dispensaries. And she said, quote, "When a dispensary comes to my attention that is close to a school, a park, a playground, or children, that's a line I've decided to draw," right? It's all about saving the children. Now, never mind that some of these dispensaries she was shutting down were in the San Francisco's Tenderloin district, where there are strip clubs, porn shops, massage parlors, taverns, liquor stores, and open-air heroin and crack markets that are closer to the children than the dispensaries are. But apparently for the Department of Justice, it's all about the children. So I would like to encourage the Department of Justice to pay attention to the Today Show on NBC today that reported about 14-year-old Anais Fournier, who downed 2 24-ounce energy drinks one December day. Then the Maryland teenager went into cardiac arrest, and 6 days later, she died. I did a report on this on the blog at stash.norml.org. You would just be amazed at the levels of caffeine and guarana and taurine that are found in these energy drinks. For example, the Monster energy drink, which is what she drank, sells its product in 16-ounce and mega 24-ounce sizes in the can, yet indicates 8 ounces as a serving size, as if the typical purchaser is going to share it with a friend or two or stash the half can to go flat in the fridge later. Their energy blend that's contained in a Monster drink is 2,500 milligrams of caffeine and other chemicals and guarana, which can have some pretty severe side effects when overdosed, like death, unlike pot.
Maybe we should take a break. We don't have any energy drinks.
No energy drinks here.
Get something to calm us down at least.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll talk more about this in hour 2, but plenty of research. Check out the blog.
It's 20 after the hour, and we have to take a short break, if you know what I mean. Please support these sponsors who support Norml Show Live.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would send you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
Nice beaver.
Thank you. I just had it stuffed.
Let me help you with that.
Hi, this is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of Norml. We are the oldest, largest, and best-known marijuana law reform organization in America, and it's all because of your support. Take some time to join Norml at www.norml.org. Your membership supports this podcast, our websites, our policy research and analysis, and our annual conferences. Changing marijuana laws is a grassroots effort, and it starts with you, the stakeholder. Join Norml today and add your voice to the millions of cannabis consumers who demand equality with our beer-drinking friends.
It's time for your daily Toker Tunes, the best in 420 friendly music from all genres that uplifts, entertains, and informs the public. Today we bring you tunes for Groovin' Thursday. Our salute to all the dopest beats and killer rhymes that we find in the best of rap, hip-hop, soul, R&B, and funk. If you'd like to submit your song to be played on Norml Show Live, send it to us at stash@norml.org. Now here's some more great independent marijuana music for today's Daily Toker Tune.
Well, I'm not doing very good on pushing the buttons today. I missed Carrie in the news intro, and then I left Kaliko on during the break, so I don't know what it is. I gave 86% on Monday, and then I followed up with 114% on Tuesday. I gave 110% yesterday, and I think today maybe it's 92%.
We're finding an average.
See?
We're finding an average.
See what? Right there. I didn't even have you on there.
It's all good. Popping in and out.
I don't know what is going on. All right. But anyway, just wanted to update you on some of the things I'm doing. By the way, Ganja John's not here today for the Groovin' Thursday. He's taking care of Ganja Wife, who needed him today. So
Ganja Wife. Boy, she needs some loving.
That's right. We hope Ganja Wife's doing okay. But also, I finished up the article. My new article for High Times Magazine should come out in the August edition, and it's called Patience Against This Legalization, parentheses, this legalization. And I just basically run down Prop 19 and then what's going on with Colorado and Washington right now and the patience groups that are organized to fight them. So there's that. You can check that out in High Times coming in August. Also tried to pitch them another article on that cannabis linguistics that I've done before.
Oh, right.
You know, the words we use, cannabis, marijuana, pot, pothead, stoner, all that kind of stuff. So check those out. That one's probably going to be up on hightimes.com, just on the online version. So,
and we're also trying to find out which edition had the Norml network had a little write-up that Alan did too.
Yeah, and that was a few months back too. I know that's up there, so we will check that out. Also, want to remind folks that at the bottom of the hour we'll have Keith Stropp, Norml's founder, here talking about the 40th anniversary of the Shafer Commission report that said to decriminalize marijuana. So all that's coming up next. So anyway, that leaves me to take care of Groovin' Thursday today. So I'm going to go back to the guy I met in Atlanta, Georgia, the Dubber, and he gave me this album, and he said I could play all the tunes off it. So I thought this next one was most appropriate. This is the Dubber, and the song is As I Sit on High.
top, baby. My balls and how my drawers lay. I guess you're wondering, lady, is that what he said? As I sit on high, you wonder why. As I sit on high, you wonder why. Just a woman told my mama he'll be the one. It ain't nothing gonna stop him until the job is done. As I sit on high, you wonder why. As I sit on high, you wonder why. That's the key to the warning. My balls and out my drawers leg. As I sit on high, you wonder why. As I sit on high, you wonder why. Boy, that's it.
Give me another one. One more for the house. One more for the house.
Hey everybody, it's Wiz Khalico from the Ivory Island Hour, which comes to you live every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Pacific on the Norml Network. I just wanted to let you know that two of my favorite bands are teaming up to spread good vibes across the land and are headed to a venue near you. Revolution is heading out on the second leg of their tour in support of the release of their new triple album, Peace of Mind, which includes full-length acoustic and dub versions. They'll also be joined by our boys from the land of Aloha, The Green. They're also promoting the recent release of their latest album, Ways and Means. You can check out a full list of shows, get the latest swag, and most importantly, find their music at revolutionmusic.com and thegreen808.com. Don't miss this amazing tour. I promise you, after these shows, you'll have peace of mind.
Fishbone pulled up there. We pulled up today in the van, and I walked out of the building, walked through the big building over, and I walked outside, and I'm walking over by the lake, and I just see everybody casually smoking weed like it's all right. Like it's supposed to be like that. Because it is all right. Like you ain't got to worry about no police coming and asking you what you smoking or what are you doing here or let me see your driver's license. See, that's how they do it in Amsterdam. Everybody just out there chilling. Ain't nobody stressing. You go buy your weed at the shop. You go kick it, smoke your weed, walk the street, do whatever you want to, and you don't...
Tune in to the Norml Network every weekday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern for our primetime lineup. We begin with an hour of daily Toker tunes, followed by Norml Show Live and Toker Talk Radio, live from Rolla J Studios in Portland, Oregon. Then, you get 2 hours of recorded podcasts from national and international reformers, followed by our late-night live shows at 11 p.m. Eastern. Then the whole 6-hour block repeats twice overnight. It's the Norml Network, your source for the best in marijuana media. One of the most disturbing elements of the war on marijuana is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows firsthand the futility of the drug war and reaches out to the community and to current law enforcement to end our war on drugs through legalization. It's time now to speak to one such officer in our continuing look at law enforcement against prohibition.
All right, folks, welcome back. And we are joined now by David Long. He's a former special agent with the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, the Division of Labor Racketeering, and he's in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, joining us by telephone. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russ. I'm happy to be here.
You know, this is a very interesting background you bring to the interview today, Division of Labor Racketeering. Explain to people what your job was.
Yes, I kind of back-ended into the war on drugs. As a special agent with the Office of Labor Racketeering, I was primarily tasked with investigating non-drug-related organized crime involving union, labor corruption, pension fund corruption, racketeering crimes that extended to maybe extortion, fraud, and so that was the task of my job as a special agent. However, as a law school, don't hold it against me, but I have a law degree.
No, we know plenty of lawyers here at Norml. Don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. As a young intern during law school back in the late 1980s, I had the opportunity to intern in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia. And there I worked with some DEA agents as well as assistant U.S. attorneys on some crack cocaine prosecutions in North Philadelphia, and watched people being sentenced, young people being sentenced to decades in prison. That I was somewhat uncomfortable at the time watching that, but I was still probably an advocate of the war on drugs, not really knowing any better. At that time, I ran into an assistant U.S. attorney that actually was getting transferred out of drug prosecutions because of his concerns about it, and that kind of stuck with me. Many years later, working with the Office of Labor Racketeering in Los Angeles, I was working identity theft cases that happened to involve the Mexican mafia, and what they were heavily involved in methamphetamine at the time, and we were executing search warrants on these very nice homes up in the Fresno area, and finding hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and weapons that I had never run into as a special agent working non-drug related organized crime. And what it turned out to be was these Mexican mafia group street gang was actually stealing identities to for two reasons. Just as it was profitable and a safer type of crime than drug trafficking, but also as a supplement to their drug trafficking crimes. They'd use funds to facilitate the drug trafficking, and also they would use these stolen identities to set up bank accounts to launder drug money.
I see.
So with running into that as essentially a white collar criminal investigator, we were really, if push comes to shove, totally outmanned, totally outgunned by these people. I was a firearms instructor for our office, for our region, and we were running into weapons that, if had been used against us, we would have no chance.
You know, it sounds to me as if you were investigating the white-collar crimes that were a result of having to do business in a black market world. I mean, it sounds like they're stealing identities in order to do the business transactions that, say, the Budweiser brewery would do at the bank.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If organized crime is taken out of the equation, everyone is safer. Innocent lives are saved. Law enforcement officers' lives are saved. And it's a better world all around.
So you said you had an inkling about the war on drugs, perhaps not being effective when you saw these folks getting busted and serving these lengthy sentences, and also how you did these raids on the drug involved crimes and found them to be heavily armed and very wealthy. Was this just a gradual awakening to this, or can you point to one particular raid or moment where there was an epiphany?
Yeah, Russ, I don't have an aha moment. I think it was more of an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I think the seed was planted for me back in the U.S. Attorney's Office as an intern during the 80s when I felt uncomfortable watching these young people being sentenced to decades in prison. However, I was more of the mindset then of they do the crime, they do the time.
Sure.
But I did listen to that prosecutor, and who I very much respected, and heard him call the war on drugs stupid. And that did stick with me. As many years later as a special agent dealing with the issues that I just spoke about, it really hit home. And then now as doing my work as a professor of criminal justice and legal studies and reflecting back on my work with organized criminals, it's clear to me that drugs should be legalized, controlled, and regulated. And that is the only way we're going to get the criminal element out of the drug scene.
Yes, it's and that brings up something that I had mentioned in a debate I was a part of a couple of weeks ago, where my opponent tried to downplay how much revenue that marijuana legalization actually contributed to these organized crime figures. Basically, the argument, they're not going to go away. They're still going to be bad guys. They're still going to commit crimes. And my response was, well, why would we want to give them any market share of anything? why would we want to fund them? How much do you project, or can you project, would be the effect of legalizing marijuana, even in one U.S. state, to these organized crime barons?
Oh, I think it'd make a huge impact. I was just reading an article that quoted the Office of National Drug Control Policy, of all places, as putting the percentage of the Mexican drug cartels' drug business is in marijuana. Mm-hmm. Alone. And so it's kind of disingenuous to, for opponents to assert that, well, they'll just get involved in other drugs. Well, that's like saying, well, if you stop robbery, we shouldn't stop robbery because there'll still be burglaries. That just makes no sense whatsoever.
Right. And the other part of that too is the reason why so much of their income is derived from marijuana is because it's popular. You can't just manufacture. People that can't get marijuana aren't going to turn to meth. They're going to
absolutely.
We're speaking with David Long, a former special agent with the Department of Labor in the Division of Labor Racketeering. And so when we're speaking of labor, this is actually organized labor is now something that is becoming an issue with respect to the medical marijuana industries that are formed in California and Colorado. And I want to point you to an article that just came out of the LA Weekly today entitled "Marijuana Dispensary Workers Taken In by Powerful Labor Union UFCW." That's the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 770, taking them in and going to announce tomorrow that healthcare and grocery workers will welcome the medical cannabis workers and their successful organizing campaign into the union. So with your background in studying unions and working with unions, and of course this isn't to say that all unions are bad or corrupt or anything like that, but as we're moving into this world where medical marijuana is becoming more legitimized and unions are going to be a part of this with respect to the labor, what tips can you give us about dealing with labor in these situations?
It's very interesting. I wasn't familiar with that. I'm not sure what tips I might have. I'm encouraged by that. However, I have some pause. I'm not absolutely not against the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. However, I think that if we look at drugs like alcohol and tobacco, which are clearly far more dangerous than marijuana, I think the discussion should be broader and go toward more legalization of marijuana for non-medicinal purposes as well. So, and a lot that scares a lot of people out there, and they think that their little Johnny's going to be able to go and buy a blunt from from the store. But that's not how I would envision, nor how LEAP would envision legalization to fold out, to roll out. Currently, marijuana is much easier to get for somebody underage than is alcohol. Nobody asks a kid. Drug dealers don't ask a 13-year-old for an ID when they're selling that kid marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a good thing, though. Any move toward normalization of our crazy drug policies is a good thing.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of the living wage union job in marijuana growing becoming just kind of an average, normal, boring thing that someone might take up as a vocation instead of this scary, drug-related thing that the media makes it out to be.
Absolutely.
So I think you're right. The more this is normalized, and this is just a part of the development of that. The part that I guess would concern me, the only part that concerns me, is we have a situation where we have this medical marijuana market running alongside a black market, and we both know the harms inherent in that prohibition-related black market. I worry about those trickling over into that semi-legitimate gray market and tainting the work that we're doing there with medical marijuana. Do you see that? Do you see the continued division between medical and legalization kind of muddying the waters?
Absolutely. The problem that you're alluding to is in a decriminalized scheme, you still leave the supply to organized crime.
Right.
And so unless it's recognized that only legalization can take the huge profit margin out of the supply and production and sale, organized criminals will continue to flock to drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So decriminalization, some people think that that might be a good thing, but you still have involvement of organized crime, bad thing. And unfortunately, when something is illegal that many people in a society want, it's illegal. So drug traffickers may make a contract with each other, but if there's a breach of contract, they can't run to court and file a lawsuit. They kill each other, mm-hmm. and they kill law enforcement, and they kill innocent people. And so that's still the same problem when you have decriminalization.
Absolutely. Well, David Long from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, we thank you for being here on the show. And before I let you go, just one last question. As a speaker for LEAP, you get to talk to a variety of audiences. And when you present the case for legalization, do you find more people are accepting of it now than when you started this campaign?
Well, I must confess, this is my first engagement as a LEAP speaker.
Oh.
However, so I feel very honored. But I do teach classes that involve drug policy, and I find I can speak about my students in general. I find my students very pro legalization as far as marijuana is concerned. Mm-hmm. But they seem to hesitate when you're talking about harder drugs,
sure.
Such as heroin or cocaine. But the logic of the marijuana argument applies there as well.
Absolutely. Like I like to say, all drugs should be legalized, but legalization is a broad spectrum that ranges from aspirin to morphine. Marijuana should probably be closer to the aspirin, and maybe heroin's closer to the morphine, but they should all be legal.
You're absolutely correct.
Well, David Long, I appreciate getting the opportunity to be your first attempt to be a LEAP speaker. You did great, and we appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have you back on again sometime.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot. And when we come back, we're going to have an extended interview with Norml founder Keith Stropp. We're going to run over the edge of the top of the hour, so stick around for that. And then after that, a little time for Toker Talk Radio. We're going to talk about Trayvon, that killing that's in the news, and more. Stick around.
You're listening to Norml Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
I can't believe I'm riding around in Cheech's van. The van made of weed.
It's not made of weed.
Oh, what's it made of? Hash? Shrooms? Lysergic acid diethylamide?
No, the van is just made of van.
Oh.
Russ Belville. Yeah, he's a scurvy dog.
Marijuana and alcohol are the two most popular recreational drugs in America. Marijuana smoking is non-toxic, relatively safe, and has a low risk of dependence. Alcohol drinking is potentially fatal, dangerous to society, and is quite addictive. Marijuana is safer, so why are we driving people to drink? That's the question of the new book, Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? By Paul Armentano, Mason Tvert, and Steve Fox. Visit Amazon.com or ChelseaGreen.com today to order your copy of Marijuana is Safer, or visit marijuanaissafer.com. All right, folks, as we mentioned earlier, today is the 40th anniversary of the release of the Shafer Commission report, the one that recommended decriminalization of marijuana to President Nixon, and the one that President Nixon promptly threw in the garbage and then started the war on drugs that we're all enjoying today. Here to talk about it is someone who was there for the release of that report and someone for whom that report's release must have been incredibly good news at the time. Keith Stropp, the founder of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws from Washington, D.C. Hi, Keith. How's it going?
It's going fine. Nothing I'd rather talk to you about than the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse. I think it was the single most important development in the last 40 years.
Yeah, and this is back when they spelled marijuana with an H.
Well, they tried. Most people didn't, but you're right. The actual report was spelled with an H.
Maybe that's why we didn't get it decriminalized, because he must have thought we were talking about some other drug.
Yeah, they didn't realize it was that same drug that caused all those Mexicans to go crazy.
Yeah. So, of course, when you founded Norml, it was 1970, 1971 when we get the official paperwork. So, you know, you can decide on which date's the official date or whatever. But since 1970, you've been fighting this. And so for, 2.5 years in, to have the federal government come back with a report that says basically what you'd been saying all those years, how'd that make you feel?
Well, I'll be honest with you, it was a surprise because when the commission was first created, we expected that it was simply going to be a group of old white men who were going to say the status quo was working fine, leave things alone. Keep in mind that this was a 13-member congressional created committee. 4 of the members were chosen by Congress from among themselves, that is, 2 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. But 9 of the members were handpicked by former President Nixon to serve on the commission. So obviously we presumed that they had picked people who would reinforce Nixon's anti-marijuana position. So our expectations were pretty low when that commission started their work. And in fact, the first exchange I had with the commission, Norml had only been in existence a few months, and I read that they were going to hold their hearing in Washington, D.C., and I sort of naively sent a letter to the staff director saying, hi, my name's Keith Stropp. I've recently founded a group called Norml, and we'd like to testify at your hearing. I was young and naive enough that I didn't realize the unlikely aspect of being invited to testify. At any event, within just a couple of days, I got a note back from the executive director saying, we're really not interested in hearing from you. Mm-hmm. Well, at that phase, I thought, well, I can't be deterred totally, so I had been working closely with former Attorney General Ramsey Clark at the time, and Ramsey, in fact, had been Attorney General only a few years earlier before that, so he was still a prominent American, and I had been working with him to get Norml up and running, so I went back to Ramsey Clark and said, Ramsey, would you be willing to testify on our behalf if we can get you invited? And he said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I get back in touch with the commission and said, well, how about this? Former Attorney General Ramsey Clark would like to testify on our behalf. And sure enough, within a day or two, I had a note back saying, Mr. Stropp, we're not interested in hearing from you or from Mr. Clark. Oh, and at that point, I simply went to the media, and naturally, the media wasn't particularly concerned about whether the commission wanted to hear from Norml because nobody had heard of Norml at the time, but they were a little surprised that they weren't interested in hearing from a man who just a couple of years earlier had been the Attorney General of the United States. And so there were major stories in the Washington Post and the New York Times saying, Commission refuses to hear from former Attorney General Clark. Within a few hours, the chairman of the commission, Governor Raymond Shafer, former Pennsylvania Governor Raymond Shafer, was on the phone to Ramsey Clark apologizing and inviting him to testify indeed at the first hearing. And even more than that, within a couple of days, I had a letter from the staff director inviting me to testify on behalf of Norml. Now, they didn't invite me to testify at the main hearing here in Washington, D.C., but nonetheless, they scheduled me to testify at a hearing a few months later in San Francisco. And as the story goes on, it's the first time I had a chance to meet Michael Aldrich and poet Allen Ginsberg, who were there testifying on behalf of a group called LEMAR, which was an earlier legalization group that eventually morphed into Amorphia, and Amorphia subsequently merged with Norml, so there was a long history there. And also, at a hearing in Chicago later that year the commission held, I had the chance to meet for the first time Guy Archer and Frank Fioramonti, two young lawyers from New York, who were working on a project they had established with the Bar Association to try to legalize marijuana, and they ended up converting it into New York Norml. And indeed, before that decade was up, they had decriminalized minor marijuana offenses in New York State. So, at any event, when they started, we didn't expect much out of the commission, but before too long, we began to hear stories that they were not as close-minded as we had thought, and that there might be some hope for this commission after all.
Yeah, so it must have been a pleasant surprise when you got the news from the commission that they had recommended decriminalization. And I think it's important to underscore as well, it wasn't just decriminalization for personal possession, but also for small transfers. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. What the commission actually recommended was the elimination of all criminal penalty, or all penalties, period, for the possession and use of marijuana, and for the not-for-profit transfers of small amounts of marijuana between adults. Now, it's interesting where that came from. Somewhere during the course of that first year, I had developed enough of a friendship with a couple of members of the commission. In particular, Dr. Tom Ungerleider from UCLA was someone we developed a friendship with. And I learned that, in fact, they had held a number of private sessions in which they had invited adults who smoked marijuana to attend those sessions and to smoke in front of the commissioners. Realized these were mostly older white men. Most of them had never seen a marijuana cigarette in their life, nor had they ever seen anyone who was smoking marijuana, so they didn't have any basis to evaluate the experience. And someone had the foresight and the courage to say, well, then why don't we invite some marijuana smokers in? Frankly, I think today people would be afraid to do that for fear that somehow the government would come in and bust them all or something. But at the time, they did. And I think, obviously, what they decided after experiencing what it was like to see people smoking marijuana is that it was no big deal. And they also learned that where do you get your marijuana? Well, what the smokers told them is that we all buy it on the black market, or we grow a few plants ourselves, but we also share it among our friends on a not-for-profit basis. And, of course, that's still true today. How many times do we go to a social event and we throw a couple of joints in our pocket because we know there'll be marijuana there, but we want to share it. We want to share our good marijuana with our friends who have their good marijuana. So by the time the Marijuana Commission report was actually issued in March of '72, we were by then expecting that it might well be a pretty good report. We were hoping it was going to recommend full legalization, and when it came out and did not, when it came out and just simply recommended decriminalizing the marijuana smoker and decriminalizing minor not-for-profit transfers, we actually had an internal debate for a month or so at Norml, unsure as to whether we should complain about what we did not receive or whether we should celebrate what we had received. And, of course, after just a few days of kicking it back and forth, I think we all came to our senses and realized that this report was, in fact, an incredibly significant step forward in the public policy debate on marijuana. It's the first and only national commission we've ever had in this country to focus on marijuana policy. And the idea that it was handpicked by an anti-marijuana zealot, Richard Nixon, and yet they still came back and essentially agreed with our basic position that there's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana, it was a godsend indeed. And the second part of that, I should add, is that the commission itself went out of business as soon as they completed their 2-year report. There were no provisions in the section of the Controlled Substances Act that had created the commission. There were no provisions for them to take that report and try to implement it at the state level. So Norml was the only group around to do that, and indeed, as a young, idealistic public interest organization, we were only too happy to take that report and to pick some good witnesses from around the country, and we basically went around, and if we could identify any state legislator in any state who was willing to introduce a marijuana decriminalization proposal, we would fly witnesses out to support that proposal at no cost to the legislator or to the legislature, and make sure that that they were not embarrassed by introducing the bill. And in fact, they came away feeling that it was a good thing they had done. Now, the first several, of course, didn't get passed, and we weren't sure which states were going to adopt it and which weren't, but there were a number of states considering it in 72 and 73. As it turned out, Oregon was the first state to finally adopt the version of decriminalization in 1973. But by 1978, we had adopted decriminalization in a total of 11 states, and at the time we thought the wind was behind our back and that there was no stopping us. Within just a few years, we expected to have decriminalized marijuana throughout the country. The reality was that we were unaware, but the mood of the country was becoming far more conservative by the end of the 1970s, and we didn't win another statewide victory. The last state to win that we won during the 70s was Nebraska in, I believe, 77. It might have been 78. We didn't win another single statewide victory until 1996, when California adopted the legal medical use of marijuana. We went 18 years without a statewide victory. But again, it wasn't that we were doing anything wrong. It was that the mood of the country had turned against us, and about all we could do was keep our head below the firing line. Yeah. Fortunately, starting in about 1990, as you're familiar with those various polling surveys, we can demonstrate that the mood of the country began to come back in our direction, and it's been a steady but slow climb in our direction ever since. And if it continues for another 3 or 4 or 5 years, I think without question, we're going to have a handful of states that will have fully legalized marijuana in this country.
All right. We're speaking with Keith Stropp, the founder of Norml, on this, the 40th anniversary of the Shafer Commission's report recommending the decriminalization of marijuana for adult use. And, of course, that report, instrumental, like you said, in gaining decriminalization throughout the 1970s with 11 states that passed decrim. But it wasn't the first government to ever report on this. It was the first federal, national, United States report, but we had the LaGuardia Commission report, British East India Hemp report, even going back to 1894. We don't have a single government that's looked at this yet that said we ought to be criminalizing pot smokers. So was it just the national scope of this that made this have more impact than, say, LaGuardia's study?
Without question. I think the LaGuardia report was terribly important at the time, but it was only a New York State report. It didn't have the same kind of national impact as a Congressional Commission report would have. And also keep in mind that having lived through the 50s and the 60s when everything was marijuana leads to heroin and marijuana's dangerous and marijuana's reefer madness, there was an enormous amount of misinformation that was prevalent at the time, and not just zealots. I mean, the average American thought that marijuana was an incredibly dangerous drug and that using it inevitably led to being addicted to heroin and other far more dangerous drugs. So to try to legalize a drug when so much misinformation was around was almost impossible. And the real value of that Marijuana Commission report was that they simply had the resources of the federal government at their disposal. They had access to every report that had ever been done. They had access to every researcher. They gave every person that felt strongly either way about marijuana a chance to voice their opinion, and the bottom line was they concluded that marijuana smoking is no big deal and it simply did not deserve to be treated as a criminal matter. And that is the essence of our position even today. So I literally do not believe we could be in the position we're in today, but for that report back in 1972. We were disappointed that the Congress did not act on it, of course, and we were disappointed that more states didn't act on it immediately. But nonetheless, over the longer haul, what's clear is it was, I think, the single most important development in the marijuana legalization field since 1970 when we came into existence.
Right, and for younger listeners, understand the tenor of the times then with Richard Nixon coming into office as, with his tough on crime platform, and just the year prior had declared drugs to be public enemy number one. In setting up this commission, there's even a famous statement from his White House tapes where he says, I want a goddamn strong statement on marijuana, one that just tears the ass out of them, and something else about the Jews, apparently. What the Christ is with the Jews, Bob? So Nixon was coming into this, with a racial hatred, a kind of an anti-Semitic hatred of marijuana legalization. Did you ever think there was any possibility that he would take seriously the recommendations of this commission?
No, honestly, we did not. In fact, what I was kind of amazed at the time was that they had done such a poor job of vetting the candidates that they were picking for the commission, because clearly, if they would have wanted to, if they would have been thorough in their work, they could have found 13 people who shared Nixon's outrageous views on marijuana, and they could have gotten a report back that simply said the status quo makes sense. Let's stay with this war on marijuana. So on one hand, it was their own fault. They were careless when they picked their candidates, and they inadvertently included some people that wanted to do the right thing, wanted to find out the truth about marijuana and act accordingly.
Oops,
but
honest researchers.
Even then, we knew, by the way, even then, that there was no way in hell that Nixon was going to pay any attention. He had even said to Raymond Shafer at some point that don't even think about coming back with a legalization recommendation. And when the report was made public, generally the procedure is the White House invites the committee members to come to the White House for a reception, and there's a social event, and he officially accepts the report. Because he didn't like their recommendations, he told them just to have the report delivered to the White House.
Yeah, try to bury it on a Friday, and I guess luckily for Nixon, or luckily for us maybe, no Fox News existed back then to amplify some of his rhetoric like that. Speaking of these presidents, and we had Nixon with his strong statements, and then, like you said, the wind was at your back. You got this recommendation. Watergate happened. Ford kind of just stumbled around for a while, and then Jimmy Carter ran for president, calling for decriminalization at the federal level. So it was an amazing time. But then come 1980, we get Ronald Reagan saying he's got evidence that smoking one marijuana cigarette is equal to brain damage of being on Bikini Island during an A-bomb blast. I mean, the rhetoric.
It was the time. It was the advent of what's called the parents groups, which we'd never heard of until the late 70s, early 80s. It was Nancy Reagan and her silly "Just Say No" campaign, as if somehow if we just said no enough times, drugs would disappear.
Yeah.
And it really was a kind of return to the 1950s. But nonetheless, for about 15 years, that was pretty much reflective of the mood of the majority of the people in this country. It's never clear to me what factors contribute when the mood of the country becomes more liberal or more conservative, but I'll tell you, having lived through it, the one thing I came away with is I'm never certain that things are going to continue in our direction just because we've had a good year or a good 2 or 3 years, because I saw it turn around in just 2 or 3 year period at the end of the 70s, and then I saw it turn around again in our favor in the early 90s. So again, when I am asked to project into the future, I am far more cautious today than I was back then.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I worry about the pendulum swing back and how quickly it can happen, and sometimes without warning for those of us who have stars in our eyes with regard to legalization.
By the way, one thing, Russ, it might be worth mentioning, even when the pendulum of public opinion turned against us, we managed not to lose a single one of those 11 decriminalization laws. Now, it's not that our opponents didn't try. I can assure you that in the majority of those states, our opponents immediately began to introduce bills to recriminalize marijuana. And in a couple of states, we were very close to losing those. But in the end, we managed to retain all 11 state laws. And then by the time the mood of the country came back in our direction in the 90s, we've since added, of course, a couple of more states to that list of decriminalization states as well. Plus, the debate now is not just decriminalizing the user, but as you know, there are a number of states where they are seriously considering full legalization, where there would be some sort of a system where consumers could buy their marijuana in a safe and secure environment, something probably analogous to the alcohol model. So we're moving forward, and as I say, I can't guarantee I'm going to be around long enough to see it, but I think for most of our listeners, they will indeed see full legalization within just a few years.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. It can't happen soon enough. Now, Keith, with respect to this Shafer Commission that we're talking about here, what would it take to get the federal government to revisit this issue? I mean, there's been so much change since the 70s, and even some of their claims where they'll say, oh, the marijuana is more potent, or they worry about medical marijuana and all the states that have it now. What could we do to get a new Shafer Commission?
Well, strangely enough, because the original Marijuana Commission ended up with a report that was far more honest and factual than most of the people expected, it probably makes it more difficult for us to get a new Marijuana Commission today. I would love to see a new commission established. I think with the science behind us today, there's lots of positive science that simply wasn't available back in the early 70s, but it is today. And I have no doubt that any kind of a reputable national commission that took a look at this policy today would not just recommend that we legalize medical use, they would recommend that we fully legalize the responsible use of marijuana for all adults. And so I would love to see another commission established. A little history on how the first one came about. The Congress was having to pass a new drug act because the prior act had been held unconstitutional. Former Harvard professor Tim Leary had been caught. He was busted bringing in a sizable amount of marijuana from Mexico at one point and didn't have a real factual defense, so his lawyers mounted a full court press on a constitutional challenge to the law, and sure enough, ended up winning it. So there were a period of a few months in late 69, early 70 when there was no federal anti-drug act. So Congress quickly put together what's called the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And mostly that's a terrible act, and it's harsh, and it's got tough penalties, and it has marijuana classified in Schedule I, claiming it has no medical use, etc. But the one good thing about that act, former Congressman Ed Koch from New York, and when he was a member of Congress, he was a very progressive congressman. Now, later, when he was mayor of New York, he was not nearly so liberal, and when he was a radio talk show host, which I think he still does, he's actually a conservative. But at any event, at the time, partly at our request, Ed Koch was willing to insert language into the Controlled Substances Act that would establish this National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse. And it was sort of his trade-off, that he would support this act if they would be willing to put this study group in. And I think most members of Congress figured, well, it can't do any harm, go ahead and approve it. Well, as it turns out, the act itself is a terrible act, but that provision that created the Marijuana Commission was the most creative and progressive thing to happen in federal drug policy in many decades. So probably the only way we would manage to get a new Marijuana Commission would be some version of what happened back in 1969 and 70. If there is a piece of legislation which the conservatives in Congress, especially the Republican Tea Partiers in the House of Representatives, for example, if they really wanted it passed, it might be feasible that we could get one of our progressive allies in the Congress to add some language to establish a new Marijuana Commission. And if that opportunity arises, I can assure you we will support it here at Norml. I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, the more facts, science, reason, and logic we can apply to the problem, the better things turn out for us.
Yeah, without question. And don't forget that we still have some, I mean, even though our friends that have been our major supporters for years are retiring this year, both Ron Paul and Barney Frank, we've got new members of Congress, such as Jared Polis from Boulder, Colorado, who are equally as supportive of full legalization, who are going to be around, and I suspect there will be some new members elected to Congress who will have the same position. As some of these states begin to experience the positive aspects of the medical marijuana industry, especially in Colorado, the way it's been developed, what they see is it's not just that they support the medical use of marijuana. They do. They realize it helps a lot of seriously ill patients. But what Representative Paulus talks about is the fact that it has attracted young entrepreneurs who created new companies and created new jobs. It's brought new industry into their state. So they see it as filling a badly needed void, creating jobs and creating new industries. And obviously, as more and more people see that firsthand, we're going to have people supporting legalization regardless of what they think about marijuana, simply because they recognize it would be good for the economy of their state.
Yes, I hope they can see that. I do worry about some of the pendulum swing back on medical with regard to the medical marijuana industry. We saw Montana actually repeal their medical marijuana only to be saved by a governor's veto. Since then, their patient numbers have dropped by half and their caregiver numbers have dropped by 90%. And just this week in Michigan, another medical marijuana state, legislators have put forth a bill to remove glaucoma as one of the qualifying conditions. I mean, the very first medical marijuana condition that Robert Randall ever qualified under in the federal law. So it seems to me like we've got to turn this corner on medical and move toward legalization before the pendulum swings back on medical.
Well, I think what we're seeing there is what we all kind of knew was going to happen if we abused those medical laws. There are a few people out there, or there's a subset of our supporters, who believe that all use is medical use, or at least they believe that if we define medical use broadly enough, then everyone in America can qualify. The problem with that, of course, is, number one, it's basically dishonest. Most people who smoke marijuana do not use it in any traditional medical sense. They smoke it because they enjoy the effects. It helps them relax in the evening, etc. But also because if, in fact, people see, non-smokers see healthy-looking people appearing to be getting medical marijuana and turning around and selling it in the parking lot to young kids, you can imagine the backlash that causes. And, of course, that's exactly what's happened around the country. In the states that are currently considering new medical use laws, in order to avoid the problem with diversion that they see on the media from mostly California, frankly, is where most of those stories emanate from. But there was too much of that in Montana as well, where, for example, there was one fellow who was providing medical recommendations by Skype. In other words, he didn't even have to meet the patient or see the medical records. Well, obviously, those are shams. They're not real. We shouldn't be trying to have healthy Americans smoke marijuana under the basis that they're sick. At Norml, we have always considered this as only incidentally about marijuana. It's really about personal freedom. And we're not willing to pay some pot doc a couple $100 and act like we're sick in order for the government to leave us alone. We need to win the right to smoke marijuana regardless of why we smoke. It's none of the government's business. So I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, we want to continue to pass medical use laws in states where they don't yet have it, but we want to focus those laws on seriously ill patients. For those of us who smoke recreationally or for personal use, let's take the time to fight and win full legalization so we don't have to act like we're sick in order to be left alone.
All right. And one last thing before we let you go, Keith. Of course, the big holiday is coming up next month. We're a little less than a month away. 420 is coming. And we will be together in Denver, Colorado, if people want to meet us. Tell folks about what we're doing in Denver and Colorado Norml.
Yes, we will, both Russ and I will be at the High Times Cannabis Cup on April 21st and 22nd. We'll have a Norml booth there and a Colorado Norml booth. We'll also be participating on some panels, including one in which we're going to be talking about this challenge of refocusing the political attention from simply medical use to full legalization, and how to do that in a manner that doesn't undermine the rights of the protections that patients currently have. have in these various states. We also are going to be having a meeting to reorganize Colorado Norml so that we're up and running and effective, and the purpose of that primarily is to support that full legalization initiative that has qualified for the ballot this fall in Colorado. It's important that Norml be there and be speaking on behalf of the consumers in support of that initiative. So if any folks are from the Denver or Colorado area and have the chance to come in, please come into the Norml booth, introduce yourself, and let's see if we can't plug you into the Colorado Norml effort.
All right, it's exciting with 2 states voting on legalization here, at least 2 states in 2012, maybe more. We'll see what happens, but it's an exciting time to be a reformer. And Keith Stropp, the founder of Norml, we're excited that we're very thrilled, actually, that you got it all started for us back in the 70s and are continuing to help us today.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Russ.
All right, we'll see you in Denver in April.
You betcha.
That was Keith Stropp. We spoke to him yesterday, actually, recorded the interview because he had so many interviews to do today regarding that 40th anniversary. Always good to talk to Keith, fountain of knowledge, especially when we talk about the genesis of Norml and this war on drugs that we are going to continue to fight. We're going to end it. We're going to end it in Keith Stropp's lifetime. That's my goal, and I hope it's yours as well. We got to call it a day here on the podcast, but stick around. We still got more of this hour 2, which is really 45 minutes now that we went extra long here on the podcast. But Wiz Khalico's here, Cannabis Carry's on the line, and we will keep it going here. And take your calls at 971-533-7111. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about the case of Trayvon Martin. We'll talk about that and more coming up here on Toker Talk Radio. So for Wiz Khalico and Cannabis Carry, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is Norml Show Live, the voice of the Marijuana Nation.
Take it on one more time. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.